Let's get started with our first news. Alex Pereira has been the center of discussion following his fight with Magomed Ankalaev, with many analysts pointing out that he may have shown too much respect in their first meeting. This isn't something new in UFC history. Fighters like Khabib Nurmagomedov often found success on the feet because of the constant threat of the takedown. That same presence can alter an opponent's mindset. Dan Hardy recently shared his thoughts in an interview with Helen Yee ahead of the rematch between Pereira and Ankalaev. According to Hardy, Pereira wasn't quite himself in the first fight. He believes Pereira respected Ankalaev's wrestling threat too much and hesitated when it mattered most. Hardy explained that Ankalaev is extremely confident as a striker, and while wrestling has always been part of his arsenal, he doesn't necessarily like to rely on it. Just knowing that it's there, however, seemed to make Pereira second-guess his movements. Hardy pointed out that Pereira is usually at his best when he's able to apply pressure in close range. When opponents walk into his range like Sean Strickland did, or when he closes distance like he did against Jamahal Hill, his size and frame become overwhelming. Opponents start to feel the pressure and often react poorly. Against Ankalaev though, Pereira wasn't able to fully capitalize on those moments because he was too cautious, constantly aware of the takedown threat. As the rematch draws closer, Pereira is already back in Las Vegas preparing for another chance at gold. In a recent video on his YouTube channel, the former champion gave fans a tour of the house where he and his team will be staying. It's the same house Team Pereira used ahead of UFC 300 when he scored that massive win over Jamahal Hill. The familiarity of his training setup could play a role in helping him regain his rhythm and confidence. Whether Pereira can replicate that UFC 300 performance and reclaim his belt remains to be seen. But one thing is clear. This time he cannot allow too much respect for Ankalaev to hold him back if he wants to walk away as champion again. Before moving to the next news, we have one quick request for you. We're constantly working on improving our content to earn your love and support. That's why we truly appreciate it if you could take just a moment to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Move on to another news. Chael Sonnen had some harsh words for Conor after the former UFC champion announced that he was dropping out of the so-called Irish presidential race. On his YouTube channel, Sonnen broke it down in his own blunt style. According to him, Conor claimed that he had withdrawn his pending plans to become the president of Ireland, but Sonnen made it clear that there was a major problem with that statement. Conor was never actually running for president of Ireland in the first place. There was no official campaign, there were no raised funds, there were no supporters waiting for him to return donations, none of it was real. Sonnen mocked the entire announcement, pointing out that you can't suspend a campaign that never existed. He ridiculed the idea of Conor suggesting that he was talking to his family about the decision. To Sonnen, that part was beyond absurd. He described Conor as someone who doesn't exactly live a lifestyle that screams family consultation. Sonnen went even further, calling out the fighter's behavior and controversial headlines. He mentioned the partying, the drugs, the scandals, the strippers, and even mocked the bizarre stories about tying a dumbbell to his private parts. All of it, according to Sonnen, proves that Conor does what he wants without thinking about the consequences. The whole "I talked to my family" excuse was, in Sonnen's eyes, just a cover-up that made no sense. But the part that truly stood out to him as the most ridiculous was the idea that Conor felt the need to offer an explanation at all. Sonnen stressed that Conor didn't owe anyone a reason for ending something that never began. There was no official recognition from the Irish Parliament, there was no ballot prepared with his name, there was no vote scheduled, and there was certainly no trip to anything resembling Ireland's version of the Secretary of State's office. For Sonnen, this entire spectacle was nothing more than a publicity stunt, another headline in a long list of outrageous stories tied to Conor's name. He framed it as yet another moment where Conor managed to put himself in the spotlight without ever actually doing anything official. The announcement of withdrawing from a race that never existed, according to Sonnen, was just one more reminder of how detached from reality the whole thing was. And in true Sonnen fashion, he didn't hold back, making it clear that to him the entire episode was nothing but laughable. Move on to another news. The MMA community has been quick to criticize Charles Oliveira after reports surfaced that he turned down a short-notice fight with Mateusz Gamrot. What really stoked the backlash is the fact that Oliveira himself has repeatedly accused others of ducking him in the past. Fans were quick to call out the irony, pointing out that when the tables turned, he was the one saying no to a fight. One fan vented their frustration on social media, writing, "The guy with the most submissions on the ground who spent his entire life mastering BJJ is suddenly scared of a wrestler with no full fight camp? Gamrot is ranked higher than Fiziev, and yet Oliveira says he was only training for a striker. Haha. Even Paddy Pimblett probably takes more risks inside the UFC's protection bubble than you, oh Lion of Brazil. That comment summed up the feeling of betrayal among fans who expected Oliveira to live up to his reputation as a fearless warrior. Another fan pointed out that Oliveira's past words were now coming back to haunt him. They wrote, "Charles can't duck Gamrot after everything he said about fighters not stepping up. Why were you talking all that talk if you weren't going to back it up when the UFC came calling?" The post gained traction quickly, with many agreeing that Oliveira had undermined his own credibility with this decision. Several others echoed the same thought, noting that Oliveira's public image as a fighter who never turns down challenges took a massive hit. One post read, "It only looks bad because Charles claims everyone's ducking him. He says no one wants to fight him. Then comes Gamrot, ready to take all the smoke on short notice, and Charles backs down. Man, I love Charles Oliveira, but even as a fan, I have to admit this is blatant ducking." Even though fans recognize that taking a fight on short notice is not easy, the situation still sparked heated debate. For many, it wasn't just about this one fight, it was about the bigger picture, Oliveira's image, his consistency, and whether his words match his actions. When you build your reputation on being the man who never shies away from any challenge, moments like this stick out even more. For now, the criticism keeps piling up, and Oliveira finds himself in a rare position where fans who once defended him are now questioning his choices. The community's frustration kept pouring in. Another fan wrote, "Charles has been calling out guys left and right for not taking short-notice fights. He says they're avoiding him, but now Gamrot steps up, and suddenly Charles doesn't want to fight him. If you don't want to fight a style you haven't been training for, then why should any UFC fighter agree to fight you? None of them ever know they're fighting you ahead of time. They don't train specifically for your style either." Even Bisping weighed in on the situation, urging Oliveira to take the fight in Rio. Fans felt that a matchup against Gamrot on Brazilian soil would have been the perfect opportunity for Oliveira to silence critics. Instead, many believe he has only fueled the narrative that he's avoiding dangerous stylistic matchups. For someone who has built a reputation on fighting anyone, anytime, this decision has left fans disappointed, with some calling it a damaging moment for his legacy. Move on to another news. Justin Gaethje might deserve the next shot at lightweight gold, and the MMA world has been buzzing about it ever since Ilia knocked out Charles Oliveira at UFC 317. With the belt now firmly around Ilia's waist, speculation has been non-stop about who his first title defense will come against. Ilia has repeatedly made it clear that he wants to fight Paddy Pimblett. When asked about a potential fight with Gaethje, Ilia claimed it isn't the kind of matchup fans are dying to see. But many disagree, and they believe Gaethje has already done enough to secure his chance. Michael Chiesa recently weighed in during an interview with MMA Junkie. He admitted there are plenty of rumors flying around about Ilia's next fight, with some people saying it could be Paddy. Others are pushing for Gaethje's, and Chiesa thinks the UFC needs to make the right move. He said that if Ilia was going to fight in December, we'd probably already know by now. Since there's been no announcement, it makes sense that negotiations are still up in the air. Chiesa broke it down further. For him, the fight with Gaethje is tough, but it's also a win-win scenario. Even if Gaethje were to win the belt, it wouldn't be a bad thing for the UFC. Gaethje is one of the most beloved fighters on the roster. He's earned the fans' respect with his warrior spirit and his willingness to take risks. Chiesa argued that because Gaethje's career window is closing, now is the time to give him that opportunity. "We only have him for just this much longer," Chiesa said. That sense of urgency is what makes the matchup so important. He also reminded everyone of the risk Gaethje took when he fought Max Holloway. Whether the UFC promised him something in return or not, nobody knows for sure. But the reality is simple. Gaethje has earned this shot. He's done it with blood, with effort, and with sacrifices most fighters could never imagine. He's left pieces of himself inside the octagon time and time again, all in pursuit of greatness and to entertain the fans. Chimaev believes that alone should be enough to reward him with a title fight. As Chimaev put it, the Paddy fight will always be there. Both Ilia and Paddy are young and time is on their side. They can build that rivalry whenever the UFC chooses. But Gaethje doesn't have that same luxury. He's at the stage of his career where every fight counts. For him, it's now or never. Meanwhile, fighters like Arman are still in the hunt, but Chimaev believes he needs one more win to truly cement his case. For Gaethje, though, the body of work speaks for itself. He's gone through wars, beaten elite competition, and given fans moments they'll never forget. At this point, handing him the title shot feels like the right move, and for many, it feels long overdue. Move on to another news. Ilia has quickly risen to the top of the UFC, but not everyone is impressed by the path he took to get there. The Spanish fighter is now the reigning lightweight champion, and before that, he held the featherweight title. With his knockout of Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 298, he became one of just 10 UFC fighters in history to hold belts in 2 different weight classes. That accomplishment alone has earned him praise, and his perfect 8-0 run in the UFC shows just how dominant he's been. Still, some fighters, and especially his rivals, are not ready to give him the full credit he feels he deserves. One of his loudest critics is Paddy Pimblett, who has had a long-standing rivalry with Ilia. Pimblett, fresh off his TKO win over Michael Chandler at UFC 314, is pushing hard for his own shot at the belt, but while making his case, he also took the time to tear down Ilia's resume. According to Pimblett, Ilia had the easiest road to a UFC championship that he's ever seen. He pointed out that Ilia's path included wins over Ryan Hall, Bryce Mitchell, and Josh Emmett, and he argued that those names don't exactly scream elite opposition. Pimblett said Ilia had to beat Josh Emmett to get a title shot. Who did he beat before that? Ryan Hall, Josh Emmett, Bryce Mitchell. That was one of the easiest routes I've ever seen to a title shot. He didn't stop there. Pimblett went on to say that Michael Chandler would have beaten every single opponent Ilia fought on his way to Volkanovski. And even against Volk, Pimblett believes the stars aligned in Ilia's favor. He pointed out that Alexander Volkanovski had already suffered a brutal knockout just months earlier at UFC 294 against Islam Makhachev. In that fight, Volka was caught with a devastating head kick, and Pimblett believes that lingering damage carried over into his fight with Ilia at UFC 298. He wouldn't have beat Volka if Volka wasn't knocked out like 12 weeks earlier, Pimblett said. In reality, the timeline shows it was closer to 4 months. But Pimblett insists the short recovery period was a huge factor in the outcome. For Pimblett, everything seems to have gone Ilia's way. The timing, the opponents, and even the circumstances surrounding the title shot lined up perfectly for him. Everything's happened at the right time for Ilia apart from when he fights me, Pimblett declared. He believes that if he had been given the same type of schedule and easy route to the title, he would already be a UFC champion himself. If I didn't have to take these little times off, these intervals, and I had the easy route to the belt like he did, I would have been champion by now, Pimblett said. As Ilia prepares for his first title defense, his dominance may be undeniable on paper, but rivals like Pimblett are determined to question his legitimacy. For Pimblett, the message is simple. Ilia's run might look impressive, but in his eyes it's been far too easy. Move on to another news. Just 2 weeks away from his highly anticipated rematch with Magomed Ankalaev at UFC 320, Alex Pereira raised eyebrows when he revealed that he was walking around at 234 pounds. With the light heavyweight limit set at 205, fans immediately began to worry about the massive cut ahead. Dropping nearly 30 pounds in such a short span can sound alarming, but Bisping isn't buying into the panic. In fact, he believes Pereira might just be having some fun at everyone else's expense. Bisping pointed out that Pereira has a history of trolling online and loves to play little games with fans. He explained that weight fluctuation is normal for fighters, and it can swing dramatically from day to day depending on what you eat and drink. According to Bisping, if you sit down for a heavy meal and then drink close to a gallon of water, the number on the scale can skyrocket within hours. That doesn't mean it reflects your real fighting weight. He guaranteed that the video Pereira posted was most likely filmed at the end of the day after eating dinner and drinking tons of fluids. The whole purpose in Bisping's eyes was simply to get people talking. He pointed to Pereira's playful nature, reminding fans of the video where he pranked Renato Moicano not long ago. Pereira has shown time and again that he enjoys mind games and thrives on creating buzz, so when he steps on a scale and flashes a huge number just weeks before the fight, Bisping sees it as classic Pereira mischief rather than a legitimate concern. For Bisping, it's not about doubting Pereira's discipline either. He knows Pereira is one of the most professional fighters in the game when it comes to preparation. Cutting weight is something he has done countless times, and it's always been under control. Suggesting that Pereira would actually be stuck at 234 this close to fight week is, in Bisping's words, simply not believable. Instead, he thinks this is part of the psychological battle. Maybe Pereira wants Ankalaev to feel a false sense of confidence, thinking his opponent might struggle with the cut. Maybe it's just Pereira entertaining himself and his fans by stirring up chatter online. Either way, Bisping is certain that this isn't something to stress over. In his mind, Pereira is exactly where he needs to be, and when fight week arrives, the Brazilian will be ready in. The idea that he's truly sitting at 234 pounds just weeks before the weigh-in is something Bisping doesn't believe for a second.